A single name whispered by accident in a Michelin-starred restaurant was enough to shatter a billionaire's perfect world. Adrian Petrov, a man whose name was a synonym for power in the tech industry, a man who could buy and sell companies before breakfast, found himself paralyzed. The voice belonged to a young waitress, her hands trembling as she cleaned up a shattered water glass. But it wasn't the broken glass that stopped his heart. It was the name she called him, a name from a past he had buried under 2 decades of wealth and lies. Why did this one man, who commanded empires with a word, crumble at the sound of a name he hadn't heard in 20 years? The answer lies in a story of stolen dreams, a forgotten promise, and a secret that was about to change everything. The Gilded Compass was a cathedral of modern cuisine, a place where money and power convened over plates of meticulously crafted art. Its patrons were the city's titans, its atmosphere a low hum of self-importance, and at the apex of this world, in the most coveted corner booth, sat Adrian Petrov. His suit was a whisper of dark, bespoke wool. His silvering hair was perfectly styled, and his eyes, the color of a winter storm, missed nothing. He was dissecting a proposal from his top executive, Genevieve Dubois, his expression an unreadable mask of cool calculation. For Adrian, dinner wasn't for pleasure. It was another battlefield. His concentration was absolute until a faint clatter followed by a sharp gasp broke the spell. A young waitress, her name tag reading Maya, had fumbled a tray while refilling his water. Glass and ice skittered across the polished marble floor, a chaotic intrusion into his ordered world. Instantly, the floor manager was gliding over his face a thundercloud. "I am so terribly sorry, Mr. Petrov," he began, his voice dripping with apology. Maya, her face flushed with a humiliating heat, knelt to pick up the larger shards of glass. I'm so sorry, sir. It slipped. Please forgive me." She looked up, her wide brown eyes filled with genuine panic. She was a student at the city college, and this job paid for her mother's medication and her tuition. Getting fired was not an option. Adrian waved a dismissive hand at the manager. "It's fine, it was an accident. Just clean it up." His voice was low and clipped, the voice of a man unaccustomed to being disturbed by such trivialities. But as Maya gathered the last piece of glass, a rogue ice cube melted against her knee, and she flinched. Looking up at the formidable man in the booth, a strange, fleeting sense of familiarity washed over her. It was something in the stern set of his jaw, the intensity in his gaze. It reminded her of the one faded photograph she had of her father. A wave of nervous energy made her tongue clumsy. "My apologies again, Mr. Daniel," she stammered, the name tumbling out before she could stop it. It was her father's name, a name that was a constant, bittersweet presence in her mind. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. The manager froze mid-bow. Genevieve Dubois, who had been silently observing, looked up from her tablet, her eyebrows knitting together in confusion. But it was Adrian Petrov who had the most profound reaction. The steel mask he wore didn't just crack. It disintegrated. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a ghastly pale grey. The pen in his hand slipped from his fingers, clattering onto his plate with a sharp clink. His eyes, which had been assessing billion-dollar deals moments before, were now wide fixed on Maya, with an expression of raw, unadulterated shock. He wasn't just surprised. He looked like he had seen a ghost. He didn't breathe. He didn't move. The entire bustling restaurant seemed to fade into a silent, distant roar in his ears. The name. Daniel. A key to a locked room in his soul, a room he had bricked up and sworn never to visit again. And this girl, this complete stranger, had just hammered a hole straight through the wall. "What? What did you just call me?" He finally managed to ask, his voice a hoarse, unrecognizable whisper. It was stripped of all its authority, all its cold command. It was the voice of a man completely undone. Maya's own blood ran cold. The gravity of her mistake crashed down on her. She had used the wrong name, a name that had clearly caused some seismic disturbance in this powerful man. I'm so sorry, sir," she stammered, scrambling to her feet. "I don't know why I said that. My father, his name was Daniel. I must have. I'm so sorry, Mr. Petrov." But her apology didn't register. Adrian was still staring his mind a whirlwind of memories he had fought for 2 decades to suppress. The smell of solder and ozone in a cramped garage. The wild, brilliant excitement in another man's eyes. The crushing weight of a terrible choice. "Get out!" he rasped, not to Maya but to the manager and his own executive. "Sir," the manager asked, bewildered. "Now." The word was a raw crack of thunder that made everyone within earshot jump. The manager practically scurried away, pulling a terrified Maya with him. Genevieve, her composure shaken, hesitated for a moment, her gaze darting between her boss's ashen face and the retreating form of the waitress. Then, with a quiet nod, she gathered her things and left the booth. Adrian Petrov was alone. He slumped back against the plush leather, his hands trembling violently. He stared at the spot where the girl had stood, his multi-billion-dollar empire. His carefully constructed life, his very identity, all feeling as fragile and transparent as the glass she had just shattered on the floor. The ghost had a name, and now it seemed it had a daughter. The drive back to his penthouse was a blur of city lights, smeared across the rain-streaked windows of his Rolls-Royce. Adrian didn't see any of it. He sat in the cavernous back seat, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand, the tremor still not entirely gone. The spirit did nothing to warm the ice that had formed in his chest. Daniel. The name echoed. It wasn't just a name. It was a life of shared dreams in a dusty Silicon Valley garage, fueled by cheap coffee and the electrifying belief that they were about to change the world. Daniel Rodriguez, his partner, his best friend, the true genius behind the core algorithm that had become the foundation of Ethelgard innovations. "Genevieve," Adrian's voice was rough when his executive finally answered his call. "I need you to do something for me. Off the books. Utmost discretion." "Of course, Adrian. What is it?" Genevieve's voice was steady, the epitome of professionalism, but he could hear the undercurrent of concern. She had never seen him lose his composure like that. "The waitress, at the Gilded Compass. Her name is Maya." He paused, the name feeling foreign and dangerous on his tongue. "Maya Rodriguez. I want to know everything. Where she lives, where she studies her family, her financial situation, her history. Everything. I want a complete field on my desk by morning." "Rodriguez," Genevieve repeated, a flicker of recognition in her tone. "As in..." "Don't ask questions, Genevieve. Just do it," he snapped, then immediately regretted his harshness. "Please, it's important." "It will be done," she said softly, and the line went dead. Adrian leaned his head back against the cool leather, closing his eyes. The past wasn't buried. It had only been sleeping. Meanwhile, in a cramped but clean apartment across town, Maya Rodriguez was reliving her own nightmare. Her hands shook as she recounted the story to her mother Maria, who sat at their small kitchen table, her fingers methodically shelling peas into a bowl. Maria's face was lined with the quiet exhaustion of a woman who had worked 2 jobs for most of her life. Her hands gnarled with early-onset arthritis. And then I called him Daniel Mama. I don't know what came over me. He looked like he was going to have a heart attack. I'm going to be fired. I know it. Maya paced the small linoleum floor, her anxiety a palpable thing. Maria paused her work, looking at her daughter with gentle, tired eyes. Mija, it was a mistake. A slip of the tongue. This man, he is rich, but he is still a man. Perhaps the name reminded him of someone. But the way he looked at me... Maya shuddered. It was more than that. It was violent, like I'd struck him. She stopped pacing and sank into the chair opposite her mother. It's just, sometimes I miss Papa so much the name is always right there, you know. Maria reached across the table and covered Maya's hand with her own. I know, my love. I know. Daniel Rodriguez was a phantom in their lives, a man of immense warmth and brilliance who had been snatched away from them 20 years ago. Maya was only 5 when he died. Her memories were fragmented like sun-drenched snapshots, the scent of his workshop that smelled of metal and rain, the rough feel of his cheek against hers, the deep, rumbling laugh that could make the whole room feel safe. Her mother told her stories of his genius of the groundbreaking data compression algorithm he was developing. He and his partner were on the verge of a breakthrough, she'd said, a breakthrough that would have changed their lives forever. Then came the accident. A single-car crash on a winding coastal road during a storm. The police report was simple, lost control, no foul play suspected. His partner, a young, ambitious man, whose name Maria could never quite recall, Adam or something like that, she'd say, had delivered the news. He'd been devastated, she remembered. He paid for the funeral and then disappeared from their lives, along with all of Daniel's research notes and prototypes, which he'd claimed were necessary to preserve his legacy. They never saw a penny. The legacy never materialized. They were left with nothing but grief and a mountain of questions. I wish I knew more about him. Mama? Maya whispered, tracing the wood grain of the table. About his work. About his partner. Maria sighed, a sound heavy with old sorrow. It was a lifetime ago, Maya. Your father was a dreamer. Perhaps his partner realized the dream was impossible without him. We had to move on. We had to survive. Survival had been their reality ever since, and now Maya feared even that was in jeopardy because of a single inexplicable slip of the tongue. She had no idea that on the other side of the city, the man she had terrified was staring at an old digitized photograph on his 30-inch monitor. A picture of 2 young men, grinning arms, slung around each other, standing in front of a garage with a hand-painted sign that read, DA Innovations, Daniel and Adrian. The file Genevieve had compiled was thorough, and it was a dagger in Adrian's heart. Maya Rodriguez, age 25, star art history student at City College, top of her class, working 30 hours a week at the restaurant to support her mother, Maria Rodriguez, who suffered from a chronic respiratory condition. Their apartment was heavily mortgaged. A recent hospital bill for Maria was 3 months overdue. It was a life of struggle, a world away from his own. It was the life Daniel's family was forced to live, while he, Adrian, lived in a palace built on Daniel's dream. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest that made it hard to breathe. He had told himself so many lies over the years, that Daniel would have wanted him to succeed, that the investors had forced his hand, that he had done what he had to do to ensure the technology saw the light of day. But looking at the pale, worried face of Daniel's daughter in a candid photo, all those lies turned to ash in his mouth. He had not just stolen an algorithm, he had stolen a future. Their future. The day after the incident, Maya went to work with a knot of dread in her stomach, fully expecting to be handed a pink slip. She spent the entire morning avoiding the floor manager, her heart leaping into her throat every time he looked in her direction. But the summons never came. The day passed, then another. It was as if the horrifying encounter with Adrian Petrov had never happened. It was unnerving. A week later, a letter arrived at their apartment. It was from the hospital. Maya opened it with trembling fingers, expecting another harsh collections notice. Instead, she stared at the single sheet of paper in disbelief. Her mother's outstanding bill, a sum of nearly $10,000 that had haunted their sleep for months, had been paid in full. An anonymous donation, the letter stated, was made to the hospital's Compassionate Care Fund and specifically allocated to cover this account. "Mama, look," Maya cried, tears welling in her eyes as she showed the letter to her mother. Maria read it, then read it again, her hand flying to her mouth. "Dios mío, a miracle. An angel must have been watching over us." Maya felt a surge of overwhelming relief, but a tiny seed of suspicion was planted in her mind. An anonymous donation. Just days after her bizarre encounter with one of the richest men in the world. It felt too convenient, too much like a coincidence. But the idea was so outlandish, she quickly dismissed it. Who was she to question a miracle? 2 weeks after that, another letter arrived, this one from the dean's office at her college. It informed her that she had been selected as the sole recipient of the newly established Phoenix Legacy Scholarship for the Arts. It was a full-ride scholarship, covering her tuition books and living expenses for the remainder of her degree. It was, the letter explained, funded by a private philanthropist who wished to remain anonymous, but was dedicated to supporting promising students who had overcome adversity. This time, the feeling of disbelief was mixed with a profound sense of unease. First, the hospital bill, now this. Lightning didn't strike twice. This wasn't a miracle. It was an intervention. And she could only think of one person with the means and perhaps a motive to intervene so powerfully in her life. But why was it pity guilt? A way to buy her silence about a moment of public weakness. The name Phoenix Legacy Scholarship also pricked at her. It sounded corporate, contrived. It wasn't the name of some long-dead historical benefactor. It felt modern, deliberate. Adrian Petrov, meanwhile, was watching from a distance, his guilt manifesting as a desperate, clumsy attempt at restitution. Each act of anonymous charity was a penance, a futile gesture to appease the ghost of his past. Genevieve arranged the payments through layers of shell corporations and foundations, ensuring no trail led back to him. "The scholarship has been accepted," Genevieve reported to him one afternoon in his sterile, glass-walled office overlooking the city. "The mother's medical bills are cleared. I've also arranged for a top specialist to, coincidentally, have an opening and for their insurance to suddenly cover the full consultation." Adrian stared out the window, his reflection a faint ghost-like image against the skyline he had conquered. Is the girl okay? Her academic advisor says she's relieved, but also confused, Genevieve answered carefully. "She's a smart young woman, Adrian. She knows this isn't random luck." "It's the best I can do," he said, his voice tight. "I can't approach her. I can't explain. What would I even say? Hello, I'm the man who built an empire on your father's stolen work, while your family struggled to survive. The words were bitter, laced with 2 decades of self-loathing. Genevieve had been with him for 15 of those years. She had always known there was a shadow in his past, a closed door in his history before he became Adrian Petrov. She knew he'd changed his name, that he'd come from nothing. But she had never known the specifics. Now, seeing the raw guilt etched on his face, she began to understand the true weight of the secret he carried. Perhaps money isn't what she needs, Genevieve suggested softly. Perhaps what she needs is the truth. Adrian turned from the window, his eyes flashing with a familiar cold fire. It was a defense mechanism. The truth. The truth would destroy everything. The company, the shareholders, my entire life. And what would it give her? A story for the tabloids and a check from a lawsuit. I am giving her a future. That is more valuable than some painful, pointless truth. But even as he said it, he knew he was lying. He was protecting himself, not her. The anonymous gifts were not for Maya's benefit. They were for his. They were an anesthetic for his conscience, a way to keep the ghost at bay. But the ghost was no longer just a memory. It had a face now. It had Maya's eyes. And he was beginning to realize that all the money in the world couldn't buy his way out of this reckoning. He was drawn to her not just by guilt, but by a desperate, inexplicable need to see the daughter of the man he had wronged, to see if any of Daniel's light shone through in her. It was a dangerous, self-destructive impulse, and he knew he wouldn't be able to resist it for long. The urge became an obsession. Adrian found himself unable to focus the meticulously ordered world of Aethelgard innovations, feeling hollow and meaningless. His mind kept drifting back to Maya, to the cascade of coincidences he had engineered in her life. He needed to see her again, not as a powerful billionaire in a restaurant, but as something else. He wasn't sure what. He knew returning to the Gilded Compass was too risky. Instead, he had Genevieve find out her schedule, her habits. He learned she spent her afternoons studying in the vast, sunlit atrium of the City Art Museum, a place she could lose herself in beauty and history, away from the cramped confines of her apartment. It was there he chose to make his move. He dressed down for him in a simple cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, leaving his usual entourage behind. He walked into the museum, an institution to which he was a major donor, and for the first time felt like an intruder. He found her easily sitting on a bench in the sculpture garden, a heavy textbook open on her lap, a notebook beside her, filled with elegant, precise handwriting. The sun caught the highlights in her dark hair, and her expression was one of intense concentration. For a moment, he just watched a knot of something unidentifiable, longing, regret, fear tightening in his stomach. She looked so much like Daniel when he was deep in thought, that same focused intensity that seemed to block out the rest of the world. Taking a breath, he walked over his footsteps echoing softly on the stone. He stopped a few feet from her bench. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet, measured. Maya looked up, startled. Her eyes widened in immediate recognition. It was him, the man from the restaurant. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. All her suspicions about the anonymous charity came rushing back with dizzying force. "Mr. Petrov," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She instinctively started to gather her books, a flight response kicking in. "Please don't go," he said quickly, holding up a hand. I wanted to apologize." Maya paused, her guard still up. "Apologize for what?" "For my behavior at the restaurant. It was inexcusable. You startled me, that's all. It was no reason to be so rude. I hope I didn't cause you any trouble with your employer." His delivery was smooth rehearsed. Maya relaxed slightly, though the knot of suspicion remained. "No, sir. It's forgotten." "Good," he said, though his gaze was still intense, searching her face for something. "I was also told, my foundation, that is, that a promising art history student at City College had recently received our Phoenix Legacy Scholarship." He feigned a mild, pleasant surprise. "I believe that was you, Maya Rodriguez." Maya's spine stiffened. So it was him. This was no coincidence. This was a calculated encounter. "Yes," she said, her voice cool. "It was. And the hospital bill." Adrian had the grace to look momentarily taken aback by her directness. He hadn't expected her to connect the dots so brazenly. He recovered quickly. "My foundation makes many anonymous donations. We hear of people in need, and we help. It's what we do." "Why me, Mr. Petrov?" Maya asked, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't some damsel in distress to be rescued by a mysterious benefactor. She was a woman who understood that in this world nothing came for free. "What is it that you want?" He was struck by her fire, her refusal to be intimidated. Daniel had had that same fire. Adrian found himself abandoning his carefully prepared script. "I don't want anything," he said, and for the first time his voice held a note of raw honesty. "When you said that name in the restaurant, it belonged to someone I knew a long time ago. A partner. A friend." He let that hang in the air. His name was Daniel. Maya's breath hitched. Her mind was racing. Her father's name was Daniel. Her father had a partner. Her father was an inventor. And this man, this tech billionaire, was admitting a connection. It couldn't be. What was his last name?" she asked, her voice trembling. Adrian hesitated. This was the precipice. Telling her the full truth was impossible, but he couldn't back away now. "It was a long time ago. The details are complicated. We had a falling out. I never knew what happened to him. It was a lie, a terrible twisting lie, but it was the only one he could offer." "I see," Maya said, though her expression said she saw much more than he was telling her. She saw the evasion in his eyes, the flicker of pain he couldn't quite conceal. He decided to change tactics to move her onto ground he controlled. "Your scholarship file was impressive, Miss Rodriguez. Your professors speak very highly of you. You have a keen mind." He leaned forward slightly. "I oversee a philanthropic foundation. We're looking to expand our arts and culture division. We need people with passion and a good eye. People like you. I could offer you an internship. Paid, of course. Something that would use your mind, not just your ability, to carry a tray." The offer was staggering. An internship at the Petrov Foundation would be a life-changing opportunity. It was a golden key that could unlock any door she wanted. It was also, she knew instinctively, a trap. He was trying to buy her to bring her into his orbit, where he could manage her, control the situation. If he was truly connected to her father, this wasn't charity. It was a strategy. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Adrian looked away toward a bronze statue of Icarus falling from the sky. "Let's just say," he said, his voice low and heavy with unspoken meaning, "that I have a debt to the past, and I believe in paying my debts." He handed her a card. It was his private number. "Think about it. The offer stands." With that, he turned and walked away. Leaving Maya Rodriguez sitting on the bench, the world tilting on its axis. The ghost of her father no longer felt like a distant, faded photograph. He was suddenly terrifyingly real, and his shadow was intertwined with that of the most powerful man she had ever met. The question was no longer if they were connected, but how. And what terrible secret was Adrian Petrov so desperate to keep hidden? The name Adrian Petrov had not always been Adrian Petrov. 22 years ago, in the nascent world of Silicon Valley startups, he had been Adrian Price, a whip-smart, ruthlessly ambitious MBA graduate with a talent for selling a vision. But the vision itself had belonged to his partner, Daniel Rodriguez. The discrepancy between the salesman and the creator had been a quiet source of tension in their small company, but their friendship had papered over the cracks. No one knew that history better than Frank Miller. Frank was a relic from a different era of journalism. His office was a cluttered mess of old newspapers, cold coffee cups, and the faint smell of cynicism. He was a Pulitzer Prize finalist from the late 90s, who now ran a small independent investigative blog that specialized in taking down giants. He didn't have the resources of the big papers anymore, but he had a nose for lies and a memory like a steel trap. Years ago, Frank had been a young tech reporter covering the dot-com boom. He had interviewed the duo behind DA, Innovations, for a piece on promising startups. He remembered Daniel Rodriguez vividly, a brilliant, passionate engineer with eyes that lit up when he talked about his compression algorithm, and he remembered Adrian Price, the polished, articulate front man. The article was never published. The startup folded abruptly after Daniel's tragic death. Frank had always felt a pang of regret about that. The technology had been revolutionary. For 2 decades, the story was a dead end. Then a few years ago, Frank was researching the meteoric rise of Ethelgard Innovations and its reclusive founder, Adrian Petrov. He found the company's original incorporation papers, and a familiar name jumped out at him: the core technology patent. The very algorithm that was the bedrock of Petrov's multi-billion-dollar empire had originally been filed by a small defunct LLC. DA Innovations. The connection was tenuous. Petrov had likely just bought the dormant patent for a pittance. It happened all the time. Still, Frank filed it away. His interest was reignited when an anonymous email landed in his inbox. It was from a disgruntled former board member of Ethelgard, forced out in a power play by Petrov. The email was short and cryptic. "You were right to be curious about the origins of Ethelgard. Petrov isn't who he says he is. Look into his past. Look for a ghost named Daniel Rodriguez." That was all Frank needed. He began digging in earnest. He pulled old DMV records, university transcripts, anything he could find. He discovered that Adrian Petrov didn't exist prior to 20 years ago. But Adrian Price, who matched his age and physical description, had disappeared at the exact same time, right after liquidating DA Innovations' assets, including the patent for a negligible sum. He had legally changed his name, moved to the other side of the country, and re-emerged a year later as Adrian Petrov, founder of a new company with a revolutionary piece of tech. The final piece of the puzzle was connecting it to the present. He ran a deep search on the name Rodriguez, cross-referenced with Petrov. He expected nothing. But then a hit. A gossip column tidbit about a strange incident at the Gilded Compass. Billionaire Adrian Petrov causing a scene, shouting at his staff. Frank made some calls to his sources on the restaurant scene. He got the waitress's name, Maya Rodriguez, Daniel Rodriguez's daughter. Frank felt the familiar, exhilarating thrill of the hunt This wasn't just a story about a shrewd business deal anymore. This was a story about betrayal, identity theft, and a 20-year-old lie. He found Maya outside her college campus, a coffee and a textbook in her hands. He approached her cautiously, his demeanor that of a kindly, rumpled professor rather than a predator. "Miss Maya Rodriguez," he began. She looked up, wary. After her encounter with Petrov, she was suspicious of all strangers. "Yes. Can I help you?" "My name is Frank Miller. I'm an investigative journalist." He handed her a business card. "I'm working on a story about the early days of the tech industry, specifically about a brilliant inventor named Daniel Rodriguez. I believe he was your father." Maya froze the coffee cup, trembling in her hand. "My father, why?" "I believe his work, his legacy may have been misrepresented," Frank said, choosing his words carefully. "I knew him briefly. I interviewed him once. He was working with a partner, a young man named Adrian Price." Maya's eyes widened. "Price, not Petrov, a different name." I don't know that name." "I'm not surprised," Frank said, his expression grim. "Because Adrian Price doesn't exist anymore. He changed his name 20 years ago to Adrian Petrov." The textbook slipped from Maya's grasp and hit the pavement with a heavy thud. The world tilted again, but this time the pieces weren't just shifting, they were clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The scholarship, the paid medical bills, the job offer, the look of sheer terror on Petrov's face in the restaurant. It wasn't just because she had said a name from his past. She had said her father's name, the name of the man he had erased. "What are you saying?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. "I'm saying," Frank said, his voice low and serious, "that Adrian Petrov's entire empire is built on your father's invention. And I think he has been lying about it, and about his own identity, for a very long time. The question is, what else is he lying about?" Frank's last question hung in the air, sinister and heavy. Maya thought of the official story of her father's death. A simple car accident. No foul play. A story delivered to her grieving mother by the man who now called himself Adrian Petrov. A cold, terrible dread, darker than any she had ever known, began to seep into her bones. The secret was no longer just about a stolen invention. It was now about a stolen life. The conversation with Frank Miller lit a fire in Maya. The grief she had carried her whole life, a soft, melancholic ache, was now forged into a sharp, cold anger. She wasn't just the daughter of a ghost anymore. She was his avenger. She declined Adrian's internship offer via a curt professional email, an act of defiance that felt both terrifying and empowering. She knew she couldn't rely solely on Frank Miller. This was her fight. She had to find her own proof, something undeniable that connected the man she knew as Petrov to the father she barely remembered. Her mother Maria had kept a single box of Daniel's belongings in a dusty corner of a storage closet. It was mostly filled with sentimental items, old sweaters that had lost their scent, a handful of dog-eared paperbacks, a coffee mug with a chipped rim. But at the very bottom, beneath a stack of his college notebooks, filled with complex equations Maya couldn't decipher, was a thin, leather-bound journal. She had never looked through it before. Her mother had said it was too painful. Now she opened it with trembling hands. Most of it was technical diagrams and formulas that meant nothing to her. But scattered between the code were personal entries written in her father's looping, energetic script. March 12th. Adrian is a marvel. He pitched the algorithm to Blackwood Capital today. He has a way of making them see the future. I just build it. He sells it. Perfect partnership. April the 2nd. The pressure from Blackwood is immense. They want to move faster, cut corners. Adrian is handling it, but I can see the strain. He's more edgy. Less talk about changing the world, more about quarterly projections. May 17th. Big fight with Adrian today. He wants to sign an amended contract with Blackwood that gives them a controlling interest and pushes me out of any governance role. He says it's the only way to get the final round of funding. It feels like he's selling my soul to them. He called me naive, said this is how the world works. Is he right? The last entry was dated 2 days before his death, June 5th. I can't shake this feeling. Something is wrong. Adrian is avoiding my calls. I found a clause in the new paperwork he wants me to sign. It effectively assigns sole ownership of the patent to him in the event of my incapacitation or departure from the company. He says it's a standard legal formality. It feels like a threat. I'm driving up the coast tomorrow to meet him at his rental, to sort this out once and for all, face to face. Maya's blood ran cold, driving up the coast tomorrow to meet him. He had been driving to meet Adrian on the very day he died. The accident was no longer a random tragedy. It was now a terrifyingly convenient event for the man who stood to gain everything from it. She needed more. She remembered her mother mentioning that Adrian Price had handled everything after the funeral. He had come to their old house and collected all of her father's research, all his prototypes. He had claimed he was preserving Daniel's legacy. He had been erasing the evidence. Driven by a cold fury, Maya took a leave of absence from her studies and her job using the first of the Phoenix Legacy Scholarship Funds to hire a private data recovery specialist. She gave him the one piece of hardware she'd found in the box, an old brick-like external hard drive from the late 90s. Daniel had labeled it Project Sparrow, Backup. While she waited, she met with Genevieve Dubois. She called Adrian's direct line, the number he had given her at the museum, and asked to speak with his executive assistant. Surprised, Genevieve agreed to meet her for coffee, likely assuming Maya was reconsidering the internship. They met in a neutral cafe far from their respective worlds. "I appreciate you meeting me, Ms. Dubois." Maya began, her voice steady. "Please call me Genevieve. I was sorry to hear you wouldn't be joining the foundation," the older woman said with polished warmth. "I can't work for him," Maya stated flatly. "But I have to ask you something. You've been with him for a long time. Do you know who he was before he was Adrian Petrov?" Genevieve's professional smile faltered. She chose her words with extreme care. "Adrian values his privacy. His past is his own." "His past is my father's past," Maya countered, her voice dropping. "My father, Daniel Rodriguez, his partner, the man whose work your entire company is based on." Genevieve visibly paled. The truth of Maya's words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had suspected she had pieced together fragments, but she had never heard it stated so plainly, so boldly. She saw the pain and determination in Maya's eyes, and her carefully constructed loyalty to Adrian began to fracture. She thought of his constant torment, his sleepless nights, the way he flinched at loud noises. She had always attributed it to the pressures of his position. Now she saw it for what it was, the haunting of a guilty man. "What do you want, Maya?" Genevieve asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The truth," Maya said. "He was supposed to meet my father the day he died. I want to know what happened on that road." Genevieve looked away, her composure crumbling. "I can't. I don't know everything. But I know that whatever happened that day, it broke him. The man you see now was forged in that fire." He's never been free of it. She leaned forward, her eyes pleading. Be careful. The truth you're looking for. It might be more terrible than you can imagine. The day the data specialist called, Maya was sitting in her apartment, her father's journal open in front of her. Miss Rodriguez, the man said over the phone. We got it. It took some doing, but we recovered most of the data from the drive. There are work files, correspondence, and one audio file. It's corrupted at the end, but the first few minutes are clear. It sounds like a recorded phone call. The file name is Blackwood Final Offer. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. Send it to me. Send it all to me now. Minutes later, a secure link appeared in her inbox. She downloaded the file, her hands shaking so badly she could barely click the mouse. She put on her headphones, closed her eyes, and pressed play. First, she heard the familiar crackling sound of a dial-up modem, a sound from another lifetime. Then a voice. Young, arrogant, confident. It was Adrian Price. Listen, the deal is the deal, Adrian's voice said. He's not signing. He's getting sentimental. Thinks the work is more than just a product. Another voice, older, colder, replied. It must be someone from Blackwood Capital. We don't pay for sentiment, Price. We paid for a patent. Is he going to be a problem? There was a pause. Then Adrian's voice returned, lower, conspiratorial. He's driving up to see me tomorrow. We're going to talk it out on the coast road. It's a nasty stretch of highway, especially if the weather turns. Things happen on that road. A man can get distracted. A car can swerve. The other voice was chillingly calm. I trust you will acquire his signature one way or another, or ensure his departure from the company is permanent. Our investment must be protected. Don't worry, Adrian said, and the sound made Maya's stomach turn. It was the sound of a man sealing a devil's bargain. I'll handle Daniel. The audio devolved into static, the end of the recording lost to time and decay. But it didn't matter. Maya ripped the headphones from her ears, a strangled sob escaping her lips. It wasn't just theft. It wasn't just a lie. It was a conspiracy. Whether by direct action or malicious inaction, Adrian Petrov was responsible for her father's death. He hadn't just stolen a legacy. He was a killer, and she was going to make him confess. The confrontation was not going to happen in a boardroom or a lawyer's office. It had to be on her terms. Maya called Adrian's private number, her voice a cold, steady instrument she didn't recognize as her own. It's Maya Rodriguez, she said when he answered. We need to talk, not about an internship, about my father. A heavy silence met her from the other end of the line. Then Adrian's voice, rough with resignation. Where? The place you were supposed to meet him. She said the words like stones in her mouth. Vista Point, on the Old Coast Highway. Sunset. She hung up before he could reply. The drive up the coast was agonizing. Every turn in the winding road was a fresh stab of grief. This was where it happened. This was where her father's life had ended. The sky was a bruised purple and orange as the sun began to sink below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the asphalt. Vista Point was a deserted turnout overlooking a sheer cliff that dropped hundreds of feet to the churning grey Pacific below. A simple guardrail was the only thing separating the road from the abyss. Adrian was already there, standing by the rail, his back to the road. He wasn't wearing his usual armor of a bespoke suit. He looked older, smaller, dressed in a simple dark coat, a man stripped of his power, waiting for judgment. Maya got out of her car, the cold sea wind whipping her hair across her face. She walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the only sound the crash of waves against the rocks below and the cry of a lone seagull. "This is where you were supposed to meet him," Maya said, her voice devoid of emotion. It was a statement, not a question. Adrian didn't turn. He just stared out at the endless water. "Yes." "He never made it," she continued, her voice gaining a hard edge. "He had a car accident just a few miles from here. Lost control, the police said. Funny how that happens." Adrian flinched, a barely perceptible tremor that ran through his body. He finally turned to face her. The mask was gone. His face was a wreck of guilt and exhaustion, his eyes haunted. "Maya, don't..." She cut him off, taking a step closer. "Don't you dare say you're sorry. I found his journal, Adrian. Or should I call you Adrian Price? I read about your fight, about the contract, about how he was coming here to confront you." She saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. He hadn't known the journal existed. "And then," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "I found this." She pulled out her phone and played the audio file. The sound of his own young, ruthless voice echoed in the sea air between them. A nasty stretch of highway. Things happen on that road. "I'll handle Daniel." Adrian visibly crumbled. It was as if the sound of his own damnation had severed the last string holding him together. He staggered back against the guardrail, his face ashen, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You killed him," Maya said, the accusation raw and brutal. "Whether you ran him off the road yourself or you just let it happen, you killed him." Tears streamed down Adrian's face, the first tears he had shed in 20 years. "No," he choked out, his voice breaking. "I swear to you, I never touched him. I couldn't have." "Then what happened?" she demanded, her own tears now starting to fall hot and angry. "Tell me the truth. For once in your miserable stolen life, tell the truth." He sank to his knees on the cold gravel, his head in his hands, the billionaire titan reduced to a broken, weeping man. "We were going to meet here," he began, his voice choked with sobs. "I was going to try and convince him to sign. The investors, Blackwood, they were threatening to sue us into oblivion, to ruin us both if we didn't give them full control of the patent. I was scared. I was young and stupid and ambitious. I thought I could make him see that it was the only way." He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "That phone call, I was posturing, trying to sound tough for the investor. I never thought." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "I was waiting here. He was late." Then the storm rolled in, worse than anyone predicted. The rain was coming down in sheets. I got a call. It was the highway patrol. There had been an accident down the road. A car matching Daniel's had gone through the guardrail further down the pass where it was weaker. They said he couldn't have survived the fall. He squeezed his eyes shut, the memory, as vivid as if it were yesterday. And my first thought, my very first god-awful thought, was not grief. It was relief. The problem was solved. The patent was mine. The investors were happy. I was free. The confession was uglier than anything Maya could have imagined. He hadn't been a murderer in action, but he had been one in his heart. He had wished her father gone, and the universe had complied. "I went to your mother." He continued, his voice thick with shame. "I lied. I played the part of the grieving friend. I took his research, his notes, and I ran. I changed my name, buried Adrian Price, and used Daniel's genius to build my world, telling myself every single day that I was honoring his legacy. But I wasn't. I was desecrating his memory. Every dollar I made, every building I put my name on, it's all been poisoned. I haven't had a single peaceful night's sleep in 20 years. He looked at Maya, his face a mask of utter self-loathing. I didn't kill your father, Maya. My greed and my ambition did. I let him die. I profited from his death. In the eyes of God, there is no difference. The wind howled around them, a mournful cry from the sea. Maya stood over him, the audio file on her phone, the journalist's evidence, the journal enough to destroy him utterly. She could send him to prison, not for murder, but for the corporate fraud, the conspiracy, the lies that had led to this moment. She could strip him of his empire and leave him with nothing. But as she looked at the broken man at her feet, she saw not a monster, but a pathetic, hollowed-out shell haunted by a ghost of his own making. Destroying him wouldn't bring her father back. It wouldn't erase the 20 years of struggle she and her mother had endured. A different kind of justice began to form in her mind. A justice her father, the brilliant, compassionate dreamer, might have wanted. "Get up," she said, her voice hard as steel. "Crying on your knees changes nothing. Your reckoning is just beginning." Adrian looked up confused. What are you going to do? You're not going to jail," she said, and a flicker of hope crossed his face, which she immediately extinguished. "That would be too easy. You're going to live with this, and you are going to pay. Not with anonymous checks or guilty job offers. You are going to give my father back his name." The story of Adrian Petrov didn't end with a dramatic courtroom battle or a scandalous headline, though Frank Miller was furious when Maya refused to give him the final damning evidence. Instead, it ended with a press conference that shook the tech world to its core. Adrian Petrov, flanked by his lawyer and a silent, poised Maya Rodriguez, publicly confessed. He told the world that the foundational technology of Ethelgard Innovations was the sole creation of his late partner, Daniel Rodriguez. He announced the renaming of the company's immensely profitable R&D division to the Daniel Rodriguez Institute for Innovation. Furthermore, 50% of the company's shares were transferred into a trust controlled by Maya, not as a payout, but as rightful ownership. He didn't confess to the conspiracy, but in admitting the theft of his legacy, he admitted to the theft of his life. Adrian Petrov kept his freedom, but lost his soul's prison. He was forced to live every day in the shadow of the man he betrayed, his name now forever a footnote to Daniel Rodriguez's genius. For Maya, it wasn't about the money. It was about seeing her father's name in lights, his picture in textbooks, his genius finally acknowledged. She had reclaimed a stolen legacy not for revenge, but for remembrance. Justice, she learned, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about rebuilding what was broken and forcing the truth into the light, no matter how long it's been buried. If this story of a life-altering secret and the difficult path to justice moved you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who loves a story that feels real. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale that uncovers the hidden truths behind the lives we think we know. What would you have done in Maya's place? Let us know in the comments below.
An Arab billionaire sneered, "Solve this and I'll give you $155 million. Nobody believed it, but the maid calmly did the impossible, and his jaw dropped in shock. Please like and comment if you're enjoying this incredible love story. Your engagement helps us bring you more amazing romantic tales. The 68th floor of Al Rashid Financial Tower buzzed with the kind of tension that only accompanied billion-dollar disasters. Khalil al-Rashid stood behind his mahogany desk, his dark eyes scanning the panoramic view of Manhattan, as if the city itself could provide answers to the algorithmic nightmare that had been plaguing his company for 3 months. At 34, Khalil had built his empire from inherited oil money into a technological powerhouse that dominated markets across 4 continents. His perfectly tailored Armani suit, worth more than most people's annual salary, couldn't hide the frustration radiating from his 6-foot frame. The stubble on his sharp jawline suggested sleepless nights, though his pride would never let him admit defeat. "Sir, the development team is requesting another meeting," his assistant Marcus announced from the doorway, his voice carefully neutral. Everyone knew better than to push their demanding boss when he was in this mood. "Tell them I don't want excuses, I want solutions," Khalil snapped, his slight accent making the words sound even more dismissive. "We've thrown $50 million at this problem. Our stock price has dropped 12%. And still, no one can crack this algorithm." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Khalil alone with his mounting anger. The quantum encryption protocol his company desperately needed remained unsolved, despite hiring the best minds money could buy. MIT graduates, Stanford PhDs, former NASA engineers, all had failed spectacularly. Through his floor-to-ceiling windows, he watched the city that never slept, oblivious to his billion-dollar headache. The irony wasn't lost on him that the man who could buy anything couldn't purchase the one thing he needed most: a solution. The soft sound of a vacuum cleaner humming in the outer office broke through his brooding. Khalil glanced at his Patek Philippe watch, 11:47 p.m. The cleaning crew was making their nightly rounds, invisible workers who maintained the pristine environment where fortunes were made and lost. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting Marcus with more bad news. Instead, a young woman entered, pushing a cart loaded with cleaning supplies. She moved with quiet efficiency, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing the standard gray uniform of the cleaning company. Something about her posture caught his attention. She carried herself with a dignity that seemed oddly out of place. "I'm sorry, Mr. Al-Rashid," she said, her voice surprisingly clear and educated. "I can come back later if you prefer." Khalil studied her for a moment. Most cleaning staff avoided eye contact with executives, but this woman looked directly at him with intelligent brown eyes that held no trace of intimidation. Interesting. "No, go ahead," he said, turning back to his computer screen where lines of impossible code mocked him. "I'll be here all night anyway." As she began dusting his bookshelf with methodical precision, Khalil found himself stealing glances at her. There was something almost meditative about her movements, as if she found peace in creating order from chaos. Unlike the frazzled energy of his highly paid employees, she radiated a calm competence that was oddly soothing. "You work late hours," he observed, more to distract himself from his problems than out of genuine interest. "Night shift pays better," she replied without looking up. "And it's quieter. Less complicated." Something in her tone suggested she knew about complications. Khalil found himself curious despite himself. "What's your name?" "Maya," she said simply, moving to clean his desk area. Her eyes inadvertently fell on his computer screen, where the impossible algorithm code was displayed in all its maddening complexity. Khalil noticed her pause, her cloth hovering over the surface of his desk. "Problem?" he asked sarcastically. "Don't worry, you won't break anything. Though at this point I'm not sure it could get any worse." Maya's eyes were fixed on the screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This is quantum encryption," she said quietly, almost to herself. Khalil's head snapped up. "Excuse me?" She seemed to realize she'd spoken aloud and quickly looked away. "Nothing, sir. I should finish and let you work." But Khalil was standing now, his full attention focused on her. "No, what did you just say about quantum encryption?" Maya's cheeks flushed slightly. I recognized some of the mathematical patterns. I used to study computer science." "Used to?" Khalil moved closer, his business instincts suddenly alert. "Before becoming a janitor?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Life doesn't always follow the plan, Mr. Al-Rashid." There was steel in her voice now, and Khalil realized he'd touched a nerve. Good. In his experience, people revealed their true nature when pushed. This algorithm, he said, gesturing at the screen, has stumped teams of PhD mathematicians for 3 months. It's cost my company millions. But you think you recognize it? Maya's eyes met his directly. I didn't say I could solve it, I just said I recognized the pattern structure. Khalil felt a familiar thrill, the same sensation he got when sensing weakness in a business negotiation. Here was an opportunity to either expose this woman's pretensions or something else entirely. Tell you what, he said, his voice taking on the smooth, dangerous tone that preceded his most ruthless business moves. If you're so confident about patterns, here's a challenge. He pulled out his phone and transferred funds with a few quick taps. I just put $155 million into an escrow account. Solve this algorithm and it's yours. Maya stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. Mr. Al-Rashid, I think you're not being serious. I'm always serious about money, Khalil replied, his dark eyes glinting with a mixture of amusement and challenge. You have 1 hour. Solve what MIT's finest couldn't, and walk away richer than most small countries. Fail and admit you're just another janitor with delusions of grandeur. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Maya's cleaning cart seemed to mock the absurdity of the situation. A billionaire offering a fortune to a woman who cleaned toilets for minimum wage. Why would you do this? Maya asked quietly. Khalil shrugged, though his casual gesture belied the intensity in his eyes. Call it entertainment. I'm tired of watching expensive experts fail. Maybe it's time to see what happens when someone with nothing to lose takes a shot. Maya looked at the computer screen again, then back at him. Something shifted in her expression, a hardening of resolve that transformed her face completely. When she straightened her shoulders, she no longer looked like a janitor at all. 1 hour? She asked. 1 hour. Maya moved to his chair and sat down with a confidence that made Khalil's pulse quicken. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for just a moment before she began typing with a speed and precision that immediately told him he'd made a terrible mistake or discovered something extraordinary. Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard with the fluid grace of a concert pianist, her previous deference completely abandoned. The transformation was so complete that Khalil wondered if he was witnessing an elaborate con or something far more intriguing. The core issue isn't the encryption itself, she murmured, her voice taking on a completely different cadence, analytical, confident, with undertones of excitement. It's the quantum entanglement verification protocol. Whoever designed this was thinking in classical terms about quantum behavior. Khalil moved behind her chair, watching lines of code appear and disappear faster than he could follow. The scent of her shampoo, something clean and understated, reached him, and he found himself oddly distracted by the graceful curve of her neck as she worked. You're debugging 3 months of work in real time, he observed, his voice closer to her ear than strictly professional. I'm not debugging, Maya replied without looking up. I'm rebuilding. Your team was trying to force a square peg into a round hole. The mathematical foundation was flawed from the beginning. Her confidence was mesmerizing. This wasn't the hesitant janitor from 20 minutes ago. This was someone who spoke the language of advanced mathematics as fluently as she breathed. Where did you learn to code like this? Khalil asked, genuinely curious now. Maya's hands paused for just a fraction of a second. MIT, Computer Science and Applied Mathematics, double major. Graduated summa cum laude. The casual way she dropped this information while completely rewriting his company's most challenging project struck Khalil as either massively arrogant or entirely truthful. Either way, he was fascinated. MIT, he repeated. And you're working as a janitor because sometimes brilliant people make catastrophically stupid personal decisions, Maya said, her voice tight with controlled emotion, like trusting the wrong person with everything they've built. There was a story there, and Khalil found himself wanting to hear it. In his experience, the most interesting people were those who'd fallen from great heights and survived. Betrayal, he guessed. Maya's typing never slowed, but he caught the almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes. business partner, also my fiancé. Amazing how efficiently someone can destroy your life when they have access to both your heart and your bank accounts. The bitter edge in her voice was unmistakable. Khalil felt an unexpected surge of anger toward a man he'd never met. "He stole from you?" "He stole everything," Maya said simply. "Company, patents, reputation, investment capital." By the time I realized what was happening, he'd positioned himself as the genius behind our innovations, and me as the pretty face who'd gotten lucky with connections. Khalil studied her profile as she worked. The strong line of her jaw, the focused intensity of her expression, the way she commanded the computer like it was an extension of herself. Nothing about Maya suggested someone who'd gotten anywhere based on looks alone. "Your patents?" he asked. "Blockchain security protocols, 3 of them, now worth about 200 million combined." Maya's laugh held no humor. "Turns out love makes you sign documents without reading them carefully." "Jesus," Khalil breathed. He'd heard of similar cases, brilliant innovators destroyed by trusted partners. But hearing it from someone currently earning minimum wage while casually revolutionizing his company's code created a cognitive dissonance he wasn't prepared for. "Almost finished," Maya announced, her voice returning to its professional tone. "Your quantum verification system needed to account for temporal variance in entangled particles. The algorithm was assuming static behavior in a dynamic environment." Khalil blinked. "I understood maybe half of that." "You don't need to understand it," Maya said with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "You just need it to work." The smile transformed her completely. Suddenly, he could see the confident MIT graduate she'd once been, the brilliant innovator who'd built something worth millions. It also made him acutely aware of how beautiful she was when she wasn't hiding behind the protective shell of someone society preferred to ignore. "There," Maya said, leaning back in his chair. "Run the verification protocol." Khalil moved to look over her shoulder at the screen. The code was elegant in a way that spoke to mathematical beauty rather than mere functionality. Even with his limited programming knowledge, he could see the difference between this and the clunky attempts his team had produced. He executed the verification sequence, hardly daring to breathe. Numbers scrolled across the screen in patterns that had eluded his experts for months. And then, impossibly, incredibly, the system displayed 2 words that had become the holy grail of his company's efforts: verification successful. "Holy shit," Khalil whispered. Maya stood up from his chair, smoothing down her gray uniform with hands that were perfectly steady. "The escrow account information should arrive in your email within the next few minutes. The transfer will complete automatically once the system passes all verification tests." Khalil stared at her. "You actually did it." "I told you I recognized the pattern structure," Maya said mildly, as if casually earning $155 million was a typical Tuesday night activity. "Maya," Khalil said, and something in his voice made her look at him directly. "This is going to sound insane, but I need to ask, are you really a janitor?" She tilted her head, considering the question. "I really clean offices for 8 hours a night, 5 days a week. I really live in a studio apartment in Queens that costs 60% of my income. I really haven't used my MIT education professionally in 3 years." "But you're not really a janitor," Khalil pressed. Maya's smile turned sad. "Mr. Al-Rashid, when you lose everything that defined who you were, you become whatever pays the bills. Tonight I was a janitor who happened to solve your algorithm. Tomorrow I'll go back to being a janitor who's rich enough to quit but probably won't because, honestly, I have no idea what else to do with myself." The vulnerability in her admission hit him unexpectedly. Here was a woman who'd just demonstrated intellectual capabilities that would make her invaluable to any tech company in the world, and she sounded lost. "You could come work for me," Khalil said impulsively. Maya laughed, but not unkindly. "Mr. Al-Rashid, you just handed me enough money to retire. Why would I want to work for someone who settles corporate disputes by throwing around 9-figure challenges?" "Because," Khalil said, moving closer to her, "I suspect you're the kind of person who needs to create things, and I'm the kind of person who makes creation possible." For a moment, something electric passed between them. Maya's eyes widened slightly as if she was seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time. Khalil felt his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the fascinating woman standing in his office at midnight, having just turned his world upside down. Then Maya stepped back, breaking the spell. "I should finish my rounds," she said quietly. "Congratulations on solving your algorithm problem, Mr. Al-Rashid." She moved toward her cleaning cart, but Khalil caught her arm gently. "Maya, have dinner with me tomorrow night." She looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. "You're asking your janitor on a date?" "I'm asking the most brilliant woman I've ever met to dinner," Khalil corrected. "The fact that I met her while she was emptying my trash can is just interesting timing." Maya studied his face for a long moment. "Mr. Al-Rashid, we both know this is a terrible idea." "Probably," Khalil agreed. "But I haven't been this intrigued by anyone in years, and after tonight I suspect you might be worth a few terrible ideas." 24 hours later, Khalil found himself in the unprecedented position of being nervous. The Michelin-starred restaurant he'd chosen for dinner suddenly seemed too formal, too much like the ostentatious displays of wealth that had probably surrounded Maya during her previous life, and that had ultimately betrayed her. He'd changed restaurants 3 times before settling on a quiet Italian place in the village that was expensive enough to show respect, but intimate enough to actually allow conversation. As he waited at their reserved table, checking his watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes, he wondered if Maya would even show up. The hostess approached with a woman Khalil almost didn't recognize. Gone was the gray uniform and practical ponytail. Maya wore a simple black dress that was elegant without being flashy, her dark hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She moved with the same quiet confidence he'd glimpsed the night before, but now it wasn't hidden beneath the protective anonymity of service work. She was absolutely stunning. "Mr. Al-Rashid," Maya said as she reached the table, and there was amusement in her voice at his obvious surprise. "Maya," he managed, standing to pull out her chair. "You look incredible. You look like someone who wasn't expecting his janitor to clean up well," she replied with a slight smile. Khalil felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I deserved that." As they settled into their seats, Khalil found himself studying her more openly. The woman across from him bore little resemblance to the service worker he'd met last night. Her posture was different, her expressions more animated. It was as if she'd been wearing a costume that she'd finally taken off. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said after they'd ordered wine. "Did you really have $155 million just sitting around to throw at a random challenge?" Khalil laughed, and the sound was more relaxed than he'd felt in months. "Define sitting around. But yes, I could access that amount relatively quickly. Why that specific number?" "It seemed large enough to be meaningful, but not so large as to be impossible," Maya said thoughtfully. "I was trying to calculate how much someone like you might consider worth the risk of looking foolish." "Someone like me," Khalil repeated. "You mean arrogant and reckless?" Maya tilted her head, studying him. "I was thinking more like successful enough to take calculated risks and confident enough to bet against conventional wisdom." Her assessment was surprisingly generous, and Khalil felt something warm unfurl in his chest. "That's a nicer interpretation than I expected. I'm generally not in the business of insulting men who've just made me financially independent," Maya said with dry humor. "Though I have to admit, the way you offered that challenge was impressively dramatic." "Impressively dramatic," Khalil mused. "I'll take that as a compliment." "You should. Most people with your kind of money are boring. All calculation, no instinct." Maya took a sip of wine, and something in her expression shifted. "Actually, that's not fair. Most people I knew with money were boring, past tense." "Tell me about him," Khalil said quietly. "Your partner." Maya's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around her wine glass. "David, what do you want to know?" "Whatever you're willing to share." For a moment, Maya looked like she might deflect the question. Then she seemed to make a decision. "We met in graduate school. Brilliant programmer, charming, came from money but acted like he'd rather be judged on merit than family connections. I thought that meant he had integrity." Her voice remained steady, but Khalil could hear the careful control beneath it. "We started working together on blockchain protocols during our final year, The chemistry was incredible, both intellectual and personal. By graduation, we were engaged and had our first provisional patent. What changed? Maya was quiet for so long that Khalil wondered if she would answer. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I found out he'd been systematically documenting our work sessions, editing the recordings to make it appear like he was leading all the innovation while I was just following along. He'd been building a case that the intellectual property was primarily his for over a year. Jesus. The patents were filed in both our names, but the supporting documentation told a different story. When our startup began attracting serious investment interest, David used that documentation to convince investors that I was a liability. Brilliant but unstable, prone to taking credit for collaborative work. Khalil felt anger building in his chest. How did he get away with it? Maya's laugh was bitter. He was very good at his job, and I was very good at trusting him. By the time I realized what was happening, he had investors, board members, and even some of our employees convinced that I was delusional. Your own employees? David was charismatic. He made people feel valued, appreciated. When he started suggesting that I was becoming possessive about work that was clearly collaborative, they wanted to believe him. Maya met Khalil's eyes directly. It's amazing how quickly people will accept a narrative that absolves them of having to choose sides. Khalil thought about his own employees, his own board members. How easy would it be for someone with the right skills to manipulate perceptions? Probably easier than he wanted to admit. What happened to the patents? Bought out of my stake for significantly less than market value. The board voted. David abstained, of course, to avoid conflict of interest. Maya's tone was conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. I was given 30 days to accept their offer or face a lengthy legal battle with people who had significantly more resources than a suddenly unemployed computer scientist. You could have fought. With what money? David had made sure I looked unstable and potentially litigious. No law firm wanted to take the case on contingency, and I couldn't afford to pay up front. Maya shrugged. Sometimes the house wins, Mr. Al-Rashid. Khalil studied her face, looking for signs of self-pity or bitterness. Instead, he saw something that looked like hard-won acceptance. You started over, he observed. I tried to, but reputation follows you in tech. David had been very thorough in his character assassination. Every job interview felt like an interrogation about my previous difficulties with collaborative work environments. So you became a janitor. I became invisible, Maya corrected. There's a difference. As a janitor, no one expects brilliance. No one wants to hear your ideas. No one asks about your past or your potential. You just exist in the spaces between other people's important lives. The sadness in her voice was almost unbearable. Khalil found himself wanting to find David and make him pay for every slight, every theft, every moment of doubt he'd planted in Maya's mind. But you're not invisible, Khalil said. Not to me. Maya looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Al-Rashid. Khalil, he corrected. And I mean it. What I saw last night wasn't just technical skill. It was artistry. The way you approach that problem, the elegance of your solution, that's not something you can fake or steal. Khalil, Maya said carefully, and his name sounded different in her voice, warmer, more personal. I appreciate what you're saying, but have dinner with me again tomorrow night, Khalil interrupted. Maya blinked. We're having dinner right now. Different dinner, different restaurant, same conversation but deeper. Khalil leaned forward slightly. I want to know more about how your mind works. I want to understand what drives someone to rebuild their entire life from the ground up. And honestly, I want to spend more time with the most interesting person I've met in years. You barely know me. Then let me fix that. Maya stared at him, and Khalil could practically see her brain working through the implications, the risks, the potential complications. Finally, she spoke. This is complicated, Khalil. We come from completely different worlds now. 3 days ago, that might have been true, Khalil said. But yesterday, you made yourself $155 million richer. Which world do you belong to now? Maya considered this. I honestly don't know. Then let's figure it out together. Something shifted in Maya's expression. a crack in the armor she'd built around herself. "Okay," she said quietly. "One more dinner." "Good," Khalil said, and his smile was genuinely warm. "Because I have a feeling we're just getting started." As if on cue, Maya's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and froze. "What is it?" Khalil asked. Maya's face had gone pale. "David," she said quietly. "He wants to meet." The coffee shop David had chosen was deliberately neutral, a chain establishment in Midtown that suggested neither wealth nor poverty, just carefully calculated anonymity. Maya sat across from the man who had once been her entire world, studying the face she'd once kissed goodnight every evening, searching for any trace of the person she'd thought she'd loved. David looked exactly the same. Perfectly groomed brown hair, expensive but understated clothing, the kind of smile that had once made her feel like she was the only person in the room. Now it made her skin crawl. "You look well, Maya," David said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of warm concern that had once comforted her during late-night coding sessions. "Really well." "Cut the bullshit, David. What do you want?" His eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Straight to the point. I always admired that about you." Maya felt her jaw clench. "You have 30 minutes before I leave." David leaned back in his chair, studying her with the calculating expression she'd learned to recognize too late. "I heard about your recent windfall. $155 million for solving an algorithm. Impressive." The words hit Maya like ice water. "How did you hear about that?" "Maya, you solved a problem that had been stumping Al Rashid Financial for months. Word travels fast in our circles." "Our circles," Maya repeated flatly. "I clean offices for minimum wage, David. We don't travel in the same circles anymore." "Don't you?" David's smile took on a predatory edge. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you found yourself a very wealthy patron. Khalil al-Rashid is quite the catch." Maya's blood turned cold. "Have you been watching me?" "I keep tabs on former business associates," David said smoothly. "It's just good practice. And imagine my surprise when I discovered that my brilliant former partner was working as a janitor in the very building where one of my potential investors operates." "Potential investors?" David's smile widened. "Al Rashid Financial has been evaluating our latest blockchain innovations for a possible partnership. Fascinating coincidence, don't you think?" Maya stared at him, her mind racing through the implications. "You orchestrated this." "I orchestrated what? You getting a job cleaning his office? You solving his algorithm? You having dinner with him last night?" David shook his head with false regret. "Maya, you always did have a tendency toward paranoid thinking." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment Maya felt the familiar doubt creeping in. Then she remembered Khalil's reaction to her solution, the genuine surprise and respect in his eyes. David couldn't have faked that. "What do you want?" she asked again. David pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. "I want you to look at this." The screen showed a contract, dense legal language that Maya's trained eye could parse quickly. It was a non-disclosure and non-compete agreement specifically related to quantum encryption algorithms. "This is my signature," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "From our original partnership agreement," David confirmed. "Section 15, subsection C. Any innovations related to quantum computing or encryption developed during our professional relationship remain subject to joint intellectual property claims for a period of 5 years post-dissolution." Maya felt the world tilt. "I never agreed to that." "Your signature suggests otherwise." David's voice remained pleasant, conversational. "Of course, at the time, quantum encryption seemed like a distant possibility. We were focused on blockchain protocols. You added this clause after I signed." "Prove it." David's smile was razor-sharp now. "The document is properly notarized, legally binding, and filed with the appropriate authorities. Any court would uphold it." Maya's hands were shaking now, and she pressed them flat against the table to hide it. "Even if this were legitimate, I didn't develop anything for you. I solved Khalil's algorithm independently." "Did you?" David tilted his head thoughtfully. Because I have documentation suggesting that some of the foundational work you used in that solution was developed during our partnership. Specifically, the temporal variance calculations that made your breakthrough possible. He was right, and they both knew it. The mathematical framework she'd used had been part of theoretical work they'd done together 2 years ago. Work that had seemed purely academic at the time. You can't prove I used that framework. I don't need to prove it, Maya. I just need to suggest it. David leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. Think about what happens when Al-Rashid Financial discovers that their brilliant new consultant might be legally obligated to share her innovations with a competitor. Think about how that affects their willingness to work with you. Maya felt sick. Khalil isn't working with me professionally, isn't he? David's eyebrows rose again. Because my sources suggest he offered you a position with his company just yesterday, and the timing of your dinner date certainly suggests a professional relationship with personal benefits. The way he said it made Maya feel dirty. You're disgusting. I'm practical. David's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. You cost me 18 months of development time, Maya. 18 months of having to recreate innovations that were rightfully mine. I'm simply recouping my losses. Those innovations were mine. Prove it, David said again, and the repetition was like a slap. In court, with lawyers, while Al-Rashid Financial watches their potential partner become embroiled in a lengthy intellectual property dispute. Maya stared at him, understanding finally dawning. You want money? I want what's fair. 50% of your recent windfall seems reasonable. $77.5 million as compensation for the foundational work that made your solution possible. And if I refuse? David's smile returned, bright and terrible. Then I file an injunction preventing you from using any algorithms that incorporate shared intellectual property. I leak the story to the tech press about the legal dispute surrounding Al-Rashid's quantum encryption solution. And I make sure every potential employer in the industry knows that working with Maya Chen comes with significant legal risks. The threat was comprehensive and devastating. Even if Maya could eventually prove her case in court, the process would destroy any chance she had of rebuilding her career or her relationship with Khalil. You bastard, she whispered. I'm a businessman, David corrected. And unlike you, I learn from our past mistakes. I don't let emotions cloud my judgment anymore. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message. Khalil's name appeared on the screen. Hope your meeting goes well. Dinner tomorrow still on? The simple message, with its assumption that she was strong enough to handle whatever David threw at her, almost broke her heart. Khalil had no idea what kind of legal and professional nightmare he was about to inherit by association. I need time to think, Maya said. Of course. David stood smoothly, leaving exact change for his coffee on the table. You have 48 hours to transfer the funds. After that, I file the paperwork and contact the press. He paused at her shoulder, his voice dropping to that intimate whisper again. Oh, and Maya? You might want to think carefully about what you tell Al-Rashid about this conversation. Men like him don't appreciate complications, especially complicated women who come with legal baggage. David walked away, leaving Maya alone with the contract and the devastating realization that even her escape from his influence had been incomplete. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Khalil. Actually, why wait? Free for dinner tonight? Maya stared at the screen, her heart breaking. She typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on, something's come up. Rain check? The response came immediately. Everything okay? Maya typed yes and immediately deleted it, then no and deleted that too. Finally, she turned off her phone and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving the contract on the table like the poison it was. She had 48 hours to choose between destroying Khalil's trust or destroying her future. Either way, David would win again. Khalil stared at his phone for the 5th time in an hour, willing Maya to respond to his messages. Her sudden coldness after David's meeting felt wrong, not like the confident woman who'd solved his impossible algorithm or the vulnerable one who'd shared her story over dinner. Something was very wrong. He was still debating whether to respect her space or track her down when Marcus knocked on his office door. "Sir, there's a David Chen here to see you. Says it's about a potential partnership opportunity." Khalil's blood ran cold. Chen, Maya's ex-fiancé, had a different last name, but the timing couldn't be coincidental. "Send him in," Khalil said, his voice carefully neutral. The man who entered his office was everything Maya had described and nothing like what Khalil had expected. Handsome in a clean-cut, unthreatening way, with the kind of practiced charm that set Khalil's business instincts on high alert. "Mr. Al-Rashid," David said, extending his hand with a warm smile. "David Chen, CEO of Chen Innovations. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me." Khalil shook the offered hand, noting the expensive watch and manicured nails. "Mr. Chen, I understand you have a business proposition." "I do. But first I feel I should mention that I know Maya quite well. Personal and professional history." The statement was clearly designed to provoke a reaction. Khalil kept his expression neutral. "Ms. Chen is an associate of mine." "Associate," David repeated thoughtfully. "Interesting way to describe someone you're dating." "My personal life isn't relevant to this meeting," Khalil said coolly. "What exactly are you proposing?" David pulled out a tablet and placed it on Khalil's desk. "I'm proposing that you might want to reconsider your association with Maya before it becomes professionally problematic." The screen showed legal documents, contracts, and what appeared to be development logs. Khalil scanned them quickly, his business law background allowing him to parse the essential elements. "This appears to be an intellectual property dispute," Khalil observed. "More than that. It's documentation proving that the algorithm Maya solved for you incorporates foundational work developed during our partnership, work that remains subject to joint ownership under our original agreement." Khalil studied the documentation more carefully. On the surface, it appeared legitimate, properly notarized, legally formatted, with Maya's signature clearly visible. But something felt off. "You're claiming ownership of Maya's solution?" "I'm claiming ownership of the mathematical framework that made her solution possible," David corrected smoothly. "The temporal variance calculations, the quantum entanglement protocols, all developed during our joint research period." "And you're telling me this because?" David's smile widened. "Because I assume you don't want your company embroiled in a lengthy intellectual property dispute, especially not over technology that might be legally questionable." Khalil leaned back in his chair, studying David with the cold assessment he reserved for hostile negotiations. "What do you want?" "For you? Nothing. This is purely about Maya and our unresolved business relationship." David's tone remained friendly, but his eyes were calculating. "I simply thought you should know what you're getting involved with." "How considerate of you." "I try to be." David collected his tablet and stood. "Of course, if Maya has misrepresented the legal status of her work to you, that could create complications, especially if your company plans to commercialize her algorithm." The threat was subtle but clear. Khalil felt anger building in his chest, not at the legal complications but at the casual way this man was trying to destroy Maya's life again. "Mr. Chen," Khalil said, his voice taking on the dangerous edge that made his board members nervous. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, but I should mention that Al-Rashid Financial has excellent legal counsel. If there are intellectual property concerns, I'm confident we can resolve them appropriately." Something flickered in David's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that his intimidation tactics weren't working as expected. "Of course," David said smoothly. "I just thought you should be aware of the potential complications that come with Maya's involvement in any project." After David left, Khalil sat alone in his office, staring at the legal implications of what he'd just learned. If David's claims were legitimate, Maya's algorithm could indeed be legally problematic. But something about the entire interaction felt wrong. His phone rang. Marcus again. "Sir, I have Dr. Elizabeth Warren from MIT on the line. She says it's about Maya Chen and that it's urgent." Khalil took the call immediately. "Dr. Warren?" "Mr. Al-Rashid, I apologize for calling unexpectedly. Maya was one of my brightest students, and I understand she recently solved a significant algorithm for your company. She did. I also understand that her former partner David has contacted you about intellectual property concerns. Khalil's pulse quickened. How did you know that? Because David Chen has spent the last 3 years systematically contacting anyone who showed professional interest in Maya. He uses the same legal documentation, the same intimidation tactics, and the same goal to ensure that Maya remains professionally isolated. The contracts are fake, the contracts are real but incomplete. What David doesn't share is the subsequent documentation that invalidates his claims. Documentation that Maya developed independently after their partnership dissolved, and that clearly establishes her sole ownership of the relevant mathematical frameworks. Doctor. Warren's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades in academic intellectual property disputes. Mr. Al-Rashid, David Chen is a brilliant programmer, but Maya is a once-in-a-generation mathematical innovator. What she created for you is entirely her own work. Why hasn't Maya defended herself? Because David is very good at making the legal battle seem costlier than surrender. And because after 3 years of professional sabotage, Maya started believing that maybe she didn't deserve to win. Khalil felt his anger crystallize into something cold and focused. Doctor, Warren, would you be willing to provide testimony about the legitimate ownership of Maya's work? I'd be delighted to. In fact, I've been waiting 3 years for someone to finally call David's bluff. After ending the call, Khalil immediately contacted his head legal counsel. Within 2 hours, he had a comprehensive strategy for not only defending Maya's intellectual property rights, but exposing David's pattern of fraudulent intimidation. The sun was setting when he finally drove to Maya's Queens apartment building. She answered her door looking exhausted and defeated, wearing old jeans and an oversized sweater that seemed designed to hide her from the world. Khalil, she said quietly, you shouldn't be here. David came to see me today, Khalil said without preamble. Maya's face went pale. What did he tell you? What? A very convincing story about shared intellectual property and legal complications. Khalil stepped closer. A story that would have worked perfectly if I hadn't also spoken to Dr. Warren from MIT. Maya's eyes widened. Elizabeth called you? She called to warn me about David's pattern of sabotaging your career, and to offer testimony that your algorithm is entirely your own work. Maya stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. But the contracts are incomplete. The documentation David uses to intimidate people conveniently omits the subsequent agreements that established your independent ownership of the relevant mathematical frameworks. I don't understand. Khalil reached for her hands, noting how cold they were despite the warm apartment. Maya, you've been legally in the right this entire time. David has been committing fraud for 3 years, and no one ever called him on it because his victims couldn't afford to fight back. Maya's legs seemed to give out and she sank onto her couch. That's not possible. It's not only possible, it's documented. My legal team spent this afternoon reviewing your original partnership dissolution. David has no legitimate claim to your work. But the companies that wouldn't hire me were scared off by lies. Khalil sat beside her, wanting to pull her into his arms, but sensing she needed space to process. Maya, David has been systematically destroying your reputation with legal threats he knew he couldn't back up in court. Maya was quiet for so long that Khalil wondered if she'd heard him. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. 3 years. I've spent 3 years believing I deserved what happened to me. You didn't deserve any of it. Maya looked at him, and Khalil saw something breaking open in her expression, not breaking apart but breaking free. What happens now? She asked. Now we destroy him, Khalil said simply. My legal team is filing charges for fraud, defamation, and intentional interference with business relationships. By tomorrow morning, David Chen's career will be over. And us? The question hung in the air between them. Khalil reached for her hand again, this time intertwining their fingers. Us, he said quietly, is entirely up to you. But Maya, I need you to know something. What I feel for you has nothing to do with algorithms or business or solving problems. It has everything to do with the fact that you're the most remarkable woman I've ever met. Maya's eyes filled with tears. Khalil, I've been so scared. For 3 years I've been scared of hoping for anything better. You don't have to be scared anymore, Khalil said, moving closer to her on the couch. I'm not going anywhere. When Maya finally kissed him, it tasted like freedom. 6 months later, Maya stood in the boardroom of Chen Innovations, watching David's former employees pack their belongings into cardboard boxes. The federal investigation had been swift and thorough. Once one victim came forward with proper legal support, dozens of others had emerged from the shadows. Hard to believe it's really over, Doctor, Warren said, joining Maya at the window that overlooked Manhattan's financial district. Sometimes I still wake up expecting it to have been a dream, Maya admitted. Good dreams have been rare the last few years. The older woman smiled. How are things with your young billionaire? Maya's cheeks warmed. Khalil isn't that young, and things are complicated. Complicated how? Last I heard, he'd offered you a position as Chief Innovation Officer with a salary that would make most CEOs weep with envy. He did. Maya sighed. And I turned him down. Dr. Warren's eyebrows rose. Dare I ask why? Because I need to know I can succeed on my own before I build a life with someone else. I spent 3 years believing I was broken. I can't jump from that into depending on Khalil's success to define my worth. And what does Khalil think about this decision? Maya smiled despite herself. He said, and I quote, "That's the most beautifully stubborn thing I've ever heard. When you're ready to take over the tech industry, I'll be here." Sounds like a keeper. He is. Maya's smile widened. Did I mention he helped me secure funding for my own startup? As an investor, not a boyfriend. Very strict boundaries. How's that going? 3 patents filed, 2 major clients signed, and a development team of 12 brilliant women who've all been burned by men like David at some point in their careers. Maya's voice carried a satisfaction that had been absent for years. We're calling it Phoenix Innovations. Perfect name. Maya was about to respond when her phone buzzed with a text from Khalil. Dinner tonight, I have news. She texted back, good news or bad news? Depends on how you feel about marriage proposals. Maya stared at her phone, her heart stopping mid-beat. Dr. Warren, reading over her shoulder, laughed out loud. Well, the older woman said, I'd say that settles the question of whether he's willing to wait. Maya's hands were shaking as she typed, that's not funny. Khalil's response came immediately. Who said I was joking? Dinner at 8? Maya excused herself from Dr. Warren and called Khalil directly. He answered on the first ring. Please tell me you're not actually planning to propose tonight, Maya said without preamble. I'm actually planning to propose right now, Khalil replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Over the phone seems less romantic, but I'm surprisingly nervous about waiting until dinner. Khalil. Maya Chen, you are the most brilliant, stubborn, incredible woman I've ever known. You've rebuilt your entire life from nothing, created a company that's already changing the industry, and somehow managed to fall in love with a workaholic billionaire who didn't know what happiness was until he met you. Maya felt tears starting to build behind her eyes. You make me want to be better than I am, Khalil continued. You make me laugh, you challenge every assumption I have about the world, and you solve impossible problems before breakfast. I love your sarcasm, your determination, your terrible habit of working until 3 in the morning, and the way you look at me like I'm worth something more than my bank account balance. Khalil, Maya whispered, I'm not asking you to give up your independence or your company or your stubborn refusal to accept help. You don't need. I'm asking you to build something with me that's bigger than either of us could create alone. Maya was crying now, standing in David's former office, surrounded by the ruins of the life he'd tried to build on stolen dreams. So, Khalil said quietly, Maya Chen, will you marry me? You can't propose over the phone, Maya managed through her tears. I can do whatever I want. I'm a billionaire, remember? His tone was teasing, but she could hear the nervous edge underneath. Besides, you still haven't answered the question. Maya wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. Ask me again at dinner. Is that a yes? That's a bring a ring and find out. Khalil's laughter was warm and relieved. Challenge accepted. 8 hours later, Maya sat across from Khalil in the same Italian restaurant where they'd had their first real conversation. He'd chosen their original table, and the familiar setting made everything feel like coming full circle. "Nervous?" Maya asked, noting how Khalil kept checking his watch. "Terrified," he admitted. "I've negotiated billion-dollar deals with less anxiety than this." "Good," Maya said with a smile. "I'd hate to think I was easy." "Easy is the last word I'd use to describe you." Khalil reached across the table and took her hand. "Ready for your official proposal?" "Actually," Maya said, "I have something to say first." Khalil's expression grew concerned. "That sounds ominous." "6 months ago I was cleaning your office and believing I was worthless," Maya said quietly. "You saw something in me that I'd forgotten existed. You didn't just give me money or opportunity. You gave me back my sense of possibility." "Maya, I'm not finished." She squeezed his hand. "You could have used my desperation to make me dependent on you. Instead, you pushed me to become independent again. You could have made our relationship about gratitude or obligation. Instead, you made it about choice." Maya stood up from her chair and moved around the table, pulling something from her purse as she went. "So before you propose to me," she said, dropping to one knee beside Khalil's chair, "I'm proposing to you." Khalil's mouth fell open as Maya opened a small velvet box containing a simple platinum band. "Khalil al-Rashid," Maya said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "You are infuriating, generous, brilliant, and absolutely terrible at taking no for an answer. You've made me remember who I was before David, and you've helped me become someone even better." She took a breath. "You challenge me, you support me, you make me laugh, and you've never once made me feel like I need to be smaller to make room for your ego. I love your ridiculous dramatic gestures, your terrible habit of throwing money at problems, and the way you look at me like I hung the moon." "Maya," Khalil whispered. "I'm asking you to build a life with me," Maya continued. "Not as my savior or my patron or my business partner, but as my equal, as my best friend, as the person I choose to love for the rest of my life." She held up the ring. "So, Khalil al-Rashid, will you marry me?" For a moment, Khalil just stared at her. Then he started laughing. Deep, joyful laughter that drew stares from other diners and made Maya's heart sing. "Yes," he said, pulling her up from the floor and into his arms. "Yes, absolutely. Definitely, yes." As he kissed her, Maya felt the last of her carefully constructed walls finally crumble completely. When they broke apart, Khalil was grinning. "Though I should mention," he said, "I also brought a ring." "Show me," Maya challenged. Khalil pulled out his own small box, revealing a stunning solitaire that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated. "Maya Chen," he said formally, "will you marry me back?" "That depends," Maya replied with a grin. "Are you prepared for a lifetime of me being right about algorithms?" "I'm prepared for a lifetime of you being right about everything," Khalil said, "as long as you're prepared for a lifetime of me pretending to argue about it." "Deal," Maya said and kissed him again. Later, as they walked hand in hand through the city that had witnessed both her downfall and her resurrection, Maya reflected on the strange turns life could take. A year ago, she'd been invisible, broken, convinced that her story was over. Now she was engaged to a man who saw her as she truly was, running a company built on her own terms, surrounded by people who valued her mind and her heart. "Any regrets?" Khalil asked, as if reading her thoughts. Maya considered the question seriously. "About David? About the 3 years? About everything that led me to that office building on the night I met you? About any of it?" Maya stopped walking and turned to face him. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "Because every terrible thing that happened led me to you. And this, us, is worth all of it. Even the part where I was an arrogant ass who challenged a janitor to solve impossible algorithms? Especially that part," Maya said with a laugh. "Though for the record, I was never really a janitor. No, I was a brilliant woman waiting for the right moment to remind the world who she was." So Maya stood on her tiptoes to kiss him one more time. "Thank you for being my moment, Khalil al-Rashid. Thank you for being mine, Maya Chen." As they walked home together, planning a wedding and a future that neither of them could have imagined 6 months earlier. Maya realized that sometimes the best love stories begin with the ending of everything you thought you wanted. Sometimes you have to lose yourself completely to discover who you were meant to become. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find someone who sees your potential even when you've forgotten it exists. Someone who doesn't save you, but stands beside you while you save yourself. Maya squeezed Khalil's hand and smiled at the city lights ahead of them, ready for whatever impossible challenges tomorrow might bring.